Heavy bass thumped through the floorboards. The ocean roared back. Naiara gripped her silver serving tray, balancing on cheap heels as the Costa Corporation's mega yacht pitched over dark offshore swells. The storm was rising. Chapter 1. She didn't belong here. She belonged beneath the quiet surface of Bahia Bay, running her bare hands over familiar coral reefs. Instead, she was suffocating in a haze of expensive cologne, burnt cigar smoke, and the heavy musk of arrogant wealth. The massive chandelier above her cast fractured light across the ballroom, illuminating the elite predators of South America's high society. The debt hanging over her orphanage gave her no choice. She needed the money to survive the winter. Waves slammed against the massive steel hull. She stumbled back. The scratchy fabric of her uniform rubbed against the turquoise, scale-like birthmark on the nape of her neck. A sharp itch of warning flared beneath her skin. Fur-draped socialites cast sideways glances at her from their velvet booths. Their ruby-red lips curled in open disgust. They whispered about the shipwreck curse, loud enough for her to hear. The sailor's superstition claimed any deck she walked upon would soon meet the ocean floor. She bit her lip. She kept walking. She balanced the crystal flutes of champagne as the deck swayed violently beneath her feet. The crystal clinked together like nervous teeth. The sound was swallowed by the arrogant chatter of billionaires and pack leaders. She just needed to make it through the next 3 hours. Then it hit her. Crushed lemons, bitter sea salt. Naiara froze in the center of the grand ballroom. Her heart skipped a frantic beat, then hammered wildly against her ribs. Liquid fire flooded her veins. It burned through her nerve endings, hot and relentless. A dormant primal instinct clawed at her insides, desperate to break free and submit. The scent was absolute. It demanded total surrender. The heavy oak doors swung open. Leandro Costa stepped into the light. He wore a bespoke black suit, but moved with the controlled violence of an apex predator. The sheer weight of his presence crushed the air from the room. The music died instantly. Hundreds of elite guests stopped breathing. The wolves among them shuddered, instinctively dropping their gazes to the floor in pure submission. No one dared to meet his eyes. He stopped on the red velvet carpet. Golden amber eyes locked directly onto hers. The world shattered. The blood roaring in her ears drowned out the rising storm outside. An invisible gravitational pull dragged her mind toward the most ruthless alpha in South America. Her breath hitched. Her muscles locked tight. Mate. The air turned to ice. Every eye in the room pivoted toward the silent exchange. Leandro closed the distance. His heavy footsteps cracked against the marble floor like a judge's gavel. He towered over her, casting a dark, suffocating shadow over her sun-darkened skin. His searing breath hit her face, carrying that overwhelming, intoxicating scent of salt and citrus. She tilted her chin up. She forced herself to meet his merciless gaze, though her hands trembled violently against the silver tray. Murmurs erupted around them. The crowd noticed the turquoise mark flashing against her brown skin under the chandelier's glare. "You," he growled. His gravelly voice tore through the dead silence. He reached out. Iron-hard fingers clamped around her delicate wrist. The shock of his touch sent agonizing sparks shooting up her arm. He dragged her out of the glittering ballroom, shoving her roughly through the heavy glass doors onto the wind-whipped balcony. Freezing ocean spray slapped Naiara's face. The chill did nothing to numb the disgust burning in his golden eyes. He released her arm as if her skin physically burned him. He sneered. A filthy human. He loomed closer, baring perfectly white, lethal teeth. The alpha aura radiated off his massive frame in crushing waves, pressing her spine against the freezing metal railing. The ocean raged 50 feet below them, churning into black peaks. A cursed, low-born human will never set foot in the Costa Maritime Empire. You are a stain on this deck. His voice was low, vibrating with pure malice. I, Leandro Costa, Lycan King of South America, reject you as my mate. The bond snapped. Agony ripped through her chest. Naiara gasped for air, choking on the sea wind. Invisible claws shredded her heart into ribbons. Her lungs seized, suffocating under the crushing weight of the severed tie. Her weak human instinct screamed at her to drop to her knees, to beg, to plead with the Alpha King to take the words back. The pain was blinding, white-hot, and absolute, but she was a daughter of the wild ocean. She straightened her spine against the railing. Defiance flared in her dark brown eyes, burning hotter than the rejection. Leandro expected submission. He expected her to shatter into tears at his feet. Instead, her lips curved into a cold, mocking smile. Without a fraction of hesitation, she lifted the crystal glass of vintage champagne from her tray. She threw the stinging, bubbling liquid directly into the billionaire's flawless, arrogant face. Gasps echoed from the ballroom doorway. Leandro unleashed a deafening feral roar, his eyes flashing to pure wolf. Naiara didn't wait for his claws to find her flesh. She hurled the heavy silver tray onto the wooden deck. She sprinted backward toward the slick metal railing. With one smooth, desperate motion, she vaulted over the edge, throwing herself into the pitch-black, churning ocean below. Lightning fractured the sky. Thunder shattered the night. The clouds boiled into a raging storm, answering the fury of the cursed girl sinking into the deep. If that moment hit you, you're not ready for what comes next. This is just the beginning of Naiara's awakening. Subscribe to Ariella and the Alpha Kings, because some bonds don't break. They transform into something far more dangerous. Chapter 2. 3 days had passed since the storm. The phantom scent of crushed lemons and sea salt refused to fade. Leandro Costa gripped the edge of his mahogany desk. His sharp claws pierced the expensive lacquer, leaving jagged, ruined splinters in the wood. The massive Lycan inside his chest was tearing at his sanity, howling endlessly for the mate he had left to the ocean. His cruel rejection was eating him alive, clawing at his insides with every breath he took. The air in the penthouse office grew thick and suffocating. Raphael, his loyal beta and executive assistant, stood frozen near the floor-to-ceiling windows. Cold sweat beaded on Raphael's forehead. He forced his breathing to remain steady against the crushing feral aura radiating from his king. Leandro had not lost control like this in a decade of rule. The Alpha's amber eyes were entirely bloodshot, clouded with raw, primal possessiveness. "Prepare the jet," Leandro growled. His voice scraped the dead silence like a serrated blade. He stood up abruptly, knocking a stack of million-dollar shipping contracts onto the velvet carpet. He couldn't endure another second in this glass cage. His beast demanded the hunt. "Sir, the Bahia acquisition was paused by the board," Raphael said carefully. To deny an alpha crazed by mate loss was suicide, but Raphael had to try. Leandro's deadly glare snapped toward him, hitting the beta with enough physical force to make his knees buckle. Leandro didn't care about the resort project. He only needed a legitimate excuse to crush the defiance out of the dark-skinned girl who haunted his waking hours. He needed to possess her. The blinding sun beat down on the shores of Bahia. Hot wind whipped the white sand into twisting dust devils. Naiara stood barefoot on the beach, her worn white capoeira uniform clinging to her sweat-drenched skin. She had just finished teaching the orphanage children. Her muscles burned with exhaustion, yet her mind felt strangely hollow. Ever since she had fallen into the freezing dark and washed ashore miles away, the turquoise scale mark on her neck had been radiating a strange, pulsing heat. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his merciless amber stare. A fleet of armored black SUVs tore through the quiet coastal road. The roar of their massive engines shattered the peaceful afternoon. The children shrieked, scattering behind Naiara's legs as massive men in tailored suits stepped out onto the sand. The oppressive, heavy musk of pureblood wolves instantly smothered the familiar scent of the salty tide. Naiara's chest tightened. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She knew that suffocating scent. The door of the lead vehicle swung open. Leandro stepped out with the chilling arrogance of a world conqueror. He pulled off his designer sunglasses. His piercing gaze locked immediately onto her small frame. She looked just as ruined, wild, and lowly as she had on the yacht. Yet the raw, vibrant energy pulsing beneath her dark skin made his blood boil with need. He hated how much he wanted her. He closed the distance, his expensive leather shoes crushing the fragile seashells beneath his heavy weight. "This land is mine now," he stated. It wasn't a business offer. It was an absolute decree. He gestured sharply, and Raphael dropped a thick folder of transfer deeds directly at Naiara's feet. Leandro wanted to sever her lifelines. He wanted to strip away everything she loved until she had no choice but to crawl to him and beg for his mercy. His arrogant wolf believed absolute power could break any spirit. Naiara looked down at the legal papers. Slowly, she lifted her chin. A cold ocean breeze swept past, catching her wild black hair. Her deep brown eyes met the raging inferno of the billionaire's stare without a single tremor of fear. She didn't flinch. Instead, her lips curled into a cold, mocking smile. She raised her bare foot and stomped down on the crisp, white documents, twisting her heel until the papers were buried in the wet, filthy sand. "This land isn't for sale to cold-blooded monsters," she spat. Her blatant defiance poured gasoline onto the inferno burning inside Leandro's chest. The air between them literally began to crackle and warp with invisible pressure. The werewolf bodyguards took several steps back, terrified of being caught in the blast zone of the Lycan King's wrath. Leandro's fists clenched so hard his knuckles popped. His eyes flared into brilliant, luminescent gold. The beast took complete control. Leandro unleashed his ultimate alpha command, a devastating psychic shockwave that ripped across the entire beach. The sheer magnitude of his dominance hit like a falling mountain. Instantly, Raphael and every elite guard groaned in absolute agony, their knees slamming violently into the unforgiving sand. They were forced to grovel, their faces pressed to the earth in total submission to their king. "Kneel," he roared. The sound carried the terrifying, coercive power capable of breaking the spine of any lesser creature. Leandro waited for the fragile human girl's bones to snap. He waited for her to collapse in a weeping heap. He needed her to understand the terrifying gap between a pure-blood king and a cursed human. The ocean surged, crashing violently against the shore. The wet sand sank beneath her feet, but Naiara didn't move an inch, while the most powerful wolves in South America trembled in the dirt around her. The petite girl stood perfectly straight, like a lighthouse weathering a hurricane. She tilted her head, her eyes glittering with cold amusement, watching him as if he were nothing more than a fool throwing a tantrum. The earth-shattering power of the Lycan King was entirely useless against the ancient ocean dormant in her veins. Chapter 3. The Alpha's command dissolved into the salty breeze. Naiara turned her back on the kneeling Lichen King without a second glance. She didn't care about his glowing amber eyes or the terrified whimpers of his billionaire entourage. Her bare feet hit the damp sand with a steady, unbothered rhythm. The ocean was calling her name, pulling her away from the toxic arrogance of the surface world. She pushed her battered wooden motorboat into the incoming tide and steered toward the deep water. But she wasn't alone. The heavy scent of crushed lemons and raw predator clung to the wind. He was following her, his dark gaze burning into her spine from the high cliffs above the bay. The hair on her arms stood up, reacting to the phantom pressure of his overwhelming dominance. Naiara gripped the steering wheel tighter, refusing to look back at the man who had shattered her soul. She pushed the throttle forward, desperate to escape into the endless blue horizon. The sea spray cooled her burning cheeks. Naiara breathed in the scent of raw kelp and distant storms, letting the rhythm of the waves steady her racing heart. She navigated past the safety of the bay, pushing her small vessel into the treacherous open waters where the elite dared not sail. The coastline vanished behind a wall of rising fog. Out here, she wasn't a cursed, low-born human or a rejected mate to be pitied. She was a daughter of the tide, wrapped in the only embrace that had never betrayed her. The water turned unusually cold. Naiara cut the engine, letting the boat drift over the jagged edges of the black reef. Silence stretched across the rolling waves, thick and oppressive, making her breath catch painfully in her throat. Then, the ocean surface shattered. 3 black tactical speedboats erupted from the swells, surrounding her tiny wooden craft in a triangle of death. These weren't Costa's corporate men. They reeked of rotting meat, feral aggression, and weaponized silver. A deafening crack split the air. A harpoon ripped through the hull of her boat, shattering the old wood into jagged splinters. Naiara plummeted into the freezing water. Salt stung her eyes, and panic flared in her chest as a rogue wolf dove in after her. Before the beast could sink its teeth into her throat, a massive black blur crashed into the waves. Leandro. The Lichen King tore through the water like a torpedo. He slammed into the rogue wolf, ripping its throat out in a cloud of blinding crimson. He had rejected her, humiliated her, yet his primal instincts refused to let his mate die. Naiara watched in stunned silence as Leandro decimated 2 more divers with brutal, calculated strikes. He shredded the assassins, his claws leaving trails of bubbles and blood in the murky depths. But he was outmatched in the deep, breathless water. A 4th diver emerged from the shadows of a sunken wreckage. A sleek, silver-tipped spear shot through the water with deadly precision. It buried itself deep into Leandro's broad chest. The Alpha King released a silent, bubbling roar of agony that vibrated through Naiara's bones. The pure silver burned his flesh, glowing with a toxic, corrosive light under the waves. His massive, powerful body went completely limp, sinking slowly into the dark abyss of the oceanic trench. Naiara's heart stopped. The mate bond she thought he had completely severed screamed violently in her blood. She dove deeper, pushing her fragile human lungs to the absolute limit. The turquoise birthmark on the back of her neck erupted with searing heat. It didn't burn like fire. It pulsed with the ancient freezing power of the deep ocean. A cascade of silver scales rippled down her arms and along her spine, replacing human vulnerability with mythical armor. The water stopped resisting her. It embraced her entirely. She wasn't just swimming anymore. She was commanding the current itself. She was a sea wolf, a legendary descendant of the ancient water goddess Yara, finally awakened by the blood of her true mate. Naiara shot forward with impossible speed, grabbing Leandro's sinking body before he hit the jagged rocks. She raised her free hand toward the surface, and a massive geyser erupted, crushing the tactical boats into twisted metal scrap. The sea demanded a heavy price for the sudden violence. The destruction of the boats triggered a violent shift in the underwater currents. A low, terrifying rumble shook the ocean floor beneath them, vibrating through Naiara's newly formed scales. She held Leandro tightly against her chest, her fingers tracing the awful wound where the silver spear remained lodged. His blood mixed with the swirling water, painting the sea with the fading scent of dying citrus. Below them, a massive, swirling vortex opened in the center of the dying reef. The whirlpool was too strong, even for her newly awakened goddess strength. It grabbed them both, spinning them into a chaotic spiral of dark water and crushing pressure. Naiara wrapped her arms fiercely around the fading Lichen King, refusing to let him go. She pressed her face into his cold neck, shielding his wounded body from the churning debris. The roaring current deafened her, pulling them down into the uncharted depths of a forbidden underwater cavern. She closed her eyes, holding on to the dying heartbeat of her mate, as the abyss swallowed them whole. Chapter 4. Water dripped steadily onto solid rock. Naiara leaned heavily against the damp cavern wall, her entire body shaking with exhaustion. The brilliant silver scales that had armored her skin slowly dissolved, sinking back into the turquoise birthmark on her neck. She hugged her knees to her chest, her human frailty returning in a crushing wave. The ancient magic of the sea had successfully purged the lethal silver from the Lichen King's heart, but the effort had nearly drained her life force. She watched his massive chest rise and fall. He was alive. Leandro gasped loudly, his golden eyes snapping open in the dim, bioluminescent light of the underwater cave. He shot up, his hands instinctively flying to his chest. The lethal gaping wound was completely gone, replaced by smooth, unblemished skin coated in wet sand. He stared at his hands, then slowly lifted his gaze. His eyes found her sitting in the shadows. The heavy silence was suddenly shattered. A frantic, echoing squawk bounced off the stone walls. A seagull tumbled violently through a narrow fissure in the cavern ceiling, crashing headfirst onto the wet rocks. Before Naiara could even blink, the bird's bones snapped and lengthened. Feathers melted into pale skin. In a matter of seconds, Joao scrambled to his feet, coughing up a mouthful of seawater and glaring through soaking wet hair. "Are you completely insane?" Joao yelled. He didn't care that he was standing in front of an apex predator. The lanky seagull shifter pointed a shaking finger directly at Leandro. The billionaire's eyes flashed with a dangerous warning, a low, rumbling growl building in his chest. Naiara tensed, ready to intervene. But Joao marched right up to the Alpha King. "Don't you dare growl at me, you overgrown mutt. First you throw my best friend off a yacht because of your stupid pureblood pride, and now you drag her into a collapsing death trap at the bottom of the ocean." Naiara let out a weak, exhausted laugh. "Stand down, Joao. He actually took a silver spear for me up there." Joao crossed his arms, shivering in the cold air. "Bare minimum. I still hate him." Leandro didn't snap back. He didn't unleash his crushing alpha aura to force the lesser shifter into submission. Instead, the Lichen King completely ignored Joao. His golden eyes remained locked entirely on Naiara, burning with an intensity that made her breath catch painfully in her throat. He moved toward her. He crawled over the sharp, wet stones. The heavy, suffocating pride that had defined Leandro Costa's entire existence seemed to shatter right there on the cavern floor. He didn't care about his ruined designer clothes. He didn't care that a seagull shifter was watching him. He reached the edge of the jagged stalagmite where she rested and stopped. Slowly, the most ruthless king in South America lowered his massive frame. He dropped to his knees. Naiara pressed her back harder against the rock. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She didn't know how to process this raw, sudden vulnerability. The man who had ordered her to kneel on the beach was now bowing his head, his broad shoulders shaking in the dim light. He reached out slowly, his large calloused hands gently wrapped around her bare, freezing ankles. "I was wrong," his voice broke, sounding harsh and hopelessly desperate. He pressed his forehead against the cold stone near her feet. "I was a blind, arrogant fool. I was so consumed by my own power that I couldn't see the truth right in front of me." He lifted his head, tears visibly welling in his glowing eyes. "You are not a curse, Naiara. You are a goddess. You possess a strength I could never hope to match." The mate bond flared between them, hot and magnetic. Naiara stared down at the broken king. The intense, burning anger that had kept her alive for the past 3 days began to melt. It was replaced by a terrifying, undeniable pull toward the man holding her ankles. She slowly reached out her hand, her fingertips trembling as they hovered just inches above his damp, dark hair. A violent tremor violently shook the floor. The ground beneath them lurched upward. A massive surge of freezing seawater blasted through the narrow fissure in the ceiling, tearing the rock wide open. The structural damage from the battle on the reef was finally caving in. The cavern ceiling groaned ominously, dropping massive boulders into the rising tide. Water flooded the space instantly. It surged past their ankles, rapidly climbing toward their waists. The oxygen in the small pocket of air grew incredibly thin. João shifted back into a seagull with a panicked shriek, desperately circling the collapsing ceiling looking for an escape, but the exit was entirely sealed by falling debris. Leandro didn't panic. He surged forward, pulling Naiara fiercely against his solid chest. He wrapped his massive arms around her, shielding her fragile human body from the falling rocks. He buried his face in her wet neck, deeply inhaling her intoxicating scent of salt and wild sea. The water rose to their chests, freezing and relentless. "If I cannot be your king on the surface," Leandro murmured against her skin, his voice entirely devoid of fear, "then let me die as your loyal subject in the deep." He closed his eyes, holding her tight as the dark water rushed over their heads. Chapter 5. The water swallowed them completely. It was freezing and absolute. Naiara felt the heavy, muscular arms of the Lichen King wrapping tighter around her waist as the remaining oxygen vanished in a rush of silver bubbles. Panic instinctively clawed at her human lungs, demanding air that didn't exist. But the ancient blood rushing through her veins refused to let them drown in the dark. The turquoise mark on the nape of her neck flared with a blinding, luminescent heat that fought back the freezing cold. The cavern ceiling groaned violently under the immense ocean pressure. Massive stone blocks detached from the roof, crashing into the swirling black water around them. She didn't need to breathe. The ocean itself was her breath. She pressed her palms flat against Leandro's solid chest, feeling the frantic, dying rhythm of his powerful heart slowing down. Her eyes snapped open. They glowed with the pure, terrifying light of the deep sea. She pushed her dormant energy outward, commanding the rising tide with a silent, absolute roar that vibrated through the water. The chaotic churning current stopped instantly, obeying the blood of their true master. A localized pressure wave exploded outward from her small frame. The sheer kinetic force of the blast shattered the remaining cavern roof into fine, harmless gravel. The ocean caught them both in a powerful, upward surging embrace. They were propelled out of the deadly abyss at terrifying speed. Naiara wrapped her arms around Leandro's neck, riding the furious vertical current toward the distant moonlight. They broke the surface with a massive splash. Fresh air flooded her lungs. Leandro gasped violently, his massive chest heaving as he instinctively dragged her closer to his protective bulk to keep them afloat. The night sky above Bahia Bay was crystal clear, illuminated by the silver glare of a massive full moon. The storm had completely broken, leaving behind a chilling, quiet breeze. The beach, however, was no longer empty. Half a dozen black corporate helicopters hovered near the shoreline, their searchlights cutting frantic white swaths across the dark water. Hundreds of elite Lycan guards paced the sand, their distress scents souring the salty air with the smell of burnt ozone and panic. Naiara commanded the final wave. The water lifted them up gently, carrying them safely over the jagged hidden reefs. The gentle swell deposited them onto the soft, wet sand of the shoreline. The sudden miraculous appearance of the Alpha King sent a massive shockwave through the gathered pack. Searchlights snapped toward them, blinding in their intensity. The massive crowd of pure-blood wolves froze in place. Their golden eyes went wide with absolute shock as they processed the impossible sight before them. Their invincible, ruthless king was soaked, covered in bruises, and kneeling in the surf. Worse, he was desperately clutching the cursed human girl against his chest, as if she were his only lifeline to the world. Silence fell over the beach. It was thick and suffocating. Only the rhythmic crashing of the waves dared to break the heavy tension. Raphael broke from the front line of the security perimeter, his face pale and drawn. The beta rushed forward across the wet sand, reaching out to assist his fallen monarch. Leandro raised a single trembling hand. The beta stopped dead in his tracks. The Alpha King slowly rose to his feet, his towering frame casting a long, intimidating shadow under the glare of the helicopter lights. He didn't look at his private army, his immense wealth, or his terrified executives. His amber eyes remained locked entirely on Naiara. He reached into the inner pocket of his ruined, soaked suit jacket. He pulled out the waterlogged signed contract for the Bahia resort land. With a deliberate, steady grip, he tore the multi-million-dollar document into tiny pieces, letting the ocean breeze scatter the scraps into the dark surf. Then, the ruler of South America did the unthinkable. In front of his elite guard, his powerful family, and the terrified locals, Leandro dropped to one knee on the wet sand. He bowed his dark head, exposing the vulnerable column of his neck in the ultimate display of absolute submission. Bahia belongs to the ocean. His deep, gravelly voice carried effortlessly over the wind. And I belong to her. Naiara is the Luna of this continent, and anyone who questions her authority will answer directly to my claws. The pack dropped instantly. Hundreds of pure-blood wolves hit their knees, their foreheads pressed into the sand in perfect unison, yielding to the Alpha's decree. The heavy, oppressive scent of pure-blood dominance melted away from the beach. It was replaced by a deep, resonant harmony of pack acceptance that washed over Naiara like a warm blanket. Naiara stood quietly before him. The brilliant silver scales faded completely, melting back into her dark, sun-kissed skin. The burning anger that had kept her alive for the past 3 days was gone, washed away by the tide and his undeniable, reckless sacrifice. She stepped forward, her bare toes sinking into the cool sand. She reached out. Her fingers gently traced the sharp, rugged line of his jaw. A low, rumbling purr vibrated deep within Leandro's broad chest. It hummed against her palms as he instinctively leaned into her gentle touch. The broken mating bond flared to life between them, no longer a chain of command, but an open, inviting door. "Look at me," she whispered softly. He lifted his head. His glowing amber eyes burned with a desperate, all-consuming devotion that stripped away the last of her doubts. She tilted her head to the side, exposing the smooth brown skin of her shoulder to the cool night air. "Claim what is yours, my king." Leandro let out a ragged, shaking breath. He stood and pulled her flush against his solid chest, his lips brushing reverently against her racing pulse point. His sharp fangs finally pierced her skin. The bond snapped perfectly into place, a roaring rush of crushed citrus and wild sea salt, forever binding the untamed ocean to the fierce wolf